So thought I would go live because I am extremely bored. Um, Trying to think about what I could talk about. Uh, Reading this book, I just actually made a video on, and I didn't post it because I was pretty distracted, to say the least. But it's a book on philosophy, and it's a really challenging book. And so, I'm literally just here just to talk and just um, it's pretty interesting though. And yeah, I guess I'll just talk about it. The book is addressing the problem of the one and the many in philosophy, which is it's kind of hard to articulate in its detail, but the concept of the one and the many, I don't know exactly when the idea first was coined as an actual problem or not. Um, but it's basically the idea that how do you bring into cohesion something that's um, has universal representation uh, and has particular um, what do you want to say? Basically, I don't want to go too deep into it because I'll be my brain's already hurting because I was reading a little bit. Let's. It makes more sense to describe it in terms of if you have the rights of an individual, their own rights that they have that God has given them versus the rights of the collective. You have a universal and a particular. You have a whole, and then you have a part of the whole. In that example, the whole would be the rights, the global rights of like human rights, or the rights of a entire country versus the rights of an individual. You have the relationship between the state and the federal government. The federal government represents states in unison together, the United States of America, um, and that relationship, and that's always been a problem. That's the one of the many problem applied to politics, but that problem exists in many different areas. The idea, let's take it into the context of you. Um, if someone asks you to describe yourself, who are you? When someone says, "Who are you?" they're asking about some type of unified aggregate of you-ness. What makes you essentially who you are? What's the most fundamental aspect of who you are? Um, and that's hard for some people to answer. I think that's innately hard for all people to answer, especially philosophically, um, because once you get into uh, to understand that the sense of you-ness is kind of progressive in the sense that there are parts of you that are falling off or being done away with, and new things that are being added on to you, right? So that could be understood in terms of character evaluation that parts of you must die, right? Especially in regards to Christianity, um, that notion of being born again, that notion of Christ calling uh, believers into dying to the self, picking up your cross and dying that you might live, right? So there's this relationship between um, or time itself, right? There is you kind of get the idea. I don't want to beat a dead horse or be redundant, but it just is really interesting because I don't think, at least for me, I took for granted those ideas, particularly the one of the many that there is, or you could say, objective moral values and duties that's binding on all people at all times, irrespective of culture, irrespective of gender, so on and so forth. And then you have certain particular situations of which usually and fallaciously people will appeal to certain circumstances to change the rule, basically. Um, and ironically, appealing to certain situations where it appears that the rule has been deviated from, you actually reinforce the necessity for a rule. Um, if you see a a pencil that is might be a weird analogy, that is bent, and you're debating over the concept of straightness, that things are that's a real aspect of the physical world, that things are straight. There are things that are straight. You wouldn't look at that one uh, bent pencil to assume that straightness is just uh, uh, is not real. There's that there aren't straight things, basically. Uh, but rather the fact that you find it problematic that it isn't straight presupposes that straightness, right, exists. Um, things, yeah. See, I'm getting a little too carried away, but so I don't know. It's just a really interesting idea that I've been kind of asking myself that question in terms of personality type. Um, and Jordan Peterson hints at this in terms of the the, the remedy for um, a directionless life, so to speak, is aiming at the highest good, which is kind of a Platonic idea in the sense of um, aiming for the ideal. But the only problem with Jordan Peterson's philosophy in that regard is that it doesn't say much about the object of which you're aiming toward, um, which seems to be kind of, it's just more of a pragmatic usage abstract of abstraction, um, to almost psychologically align yourself in such a way that produces favorable results over unfavorable results. Um, it says nothing about, and it says nothing metaphysically about what is actually real. Um, and so it's almost, that's why he appeals to myths and mythical stories and stuff like that. Um, to me, that doesn't go too far. I think that that's as far as, I'm not saying he's an atheist, but I think it's as far as an unbelieving worldview can account for, to be quite honest. Um, but I also think it's just evidencing that people know of God, and they know what He requires, and they know Him on an intimate basis, in the sense of very familiar with, very aware of God. That's what Calvin referred to as a sensus um, divinatus, or something like that. The sense of the divine, the sense of God in the hearts of man. And actually, I was reading the fourth chapter of Calvin's Institutes, and he talked about how even man, uh, because man in his fallen state outside of Christ, um, he can't get away of the sense of God in him because everything is revelational to him. Everything reveals what he intuitively knows about God and about his own frame, his own nature, that he's just a creature. But because of his sin, he's he's vehemently drawn away from God and is actively um, resisting um, the natural trajectory that revelation would lead him to, right? So everything in all existence, uh, from a more of a reformed uh, understanding of Christian theology, I guess you could say, everything's revelational. There are no facts in the universe that are uninterpreted as if they're just brute facts. But obviously, from a Christian foundation, they're known by God intimately, and His decrees determine their context. So a cow is not a cow simply for the sake of it being a cow. A cow is a cow in its relationship to other objects, other things, as they relate to other things that have a certain legitimacy in history. And that history is contingent upon what God knows will happen and will be, uh, as well as what his decree allows them to be, right? So his decree and his knowledge uh, are compatible in a sense. That's what it seems like biblically. It's what it seems like um, philosophically. Uh, so um, yeah, I'm kind of jumping around, but it's just it's really interesting, and I want to be able to articulate it better and give better examples because that concept of things that are universal versus things that are um, things that are contextual or the many or circumstantial or I here's another way to correlate it. TI versus TE in socionics. TI is obviously uh, the structuring, the logical, axiomatic understanding of something. It's the rule, basically. TE is dynamic and variant and is event based, is particular to a certain uh, goal. And so the effects of TE in that regard are, uh, in a person, as it manifests in a person, is someone who's not trying to um, necessarily do things by the book. Because if you do things by the book, it's obviously going to slow down your productivity to a certain degree, and your effectiveness and your efficiency. And extroverted logic is dealing with um, the effectiveness of actions, so to speak, to yield a definite, more favorable result, right? Um, that applies in information. TE users are not really uber concerned about the structure that is almost the precondition for the data that they desire to acquire, but rather, I want to know how to do this quickly. Um, Give me information on a need to know basis, and I will. It's really interesting too because there's almost like a relationship between the base and the ignoring, where the more you accumulate, it seems, and interact out of your base, your lead, the ignoring just becomes a natural byproduct of swimming in that macro information. So, for example, like TE users, one of the reasons they have good TI is because the more data that you acquire, the more apparent structures become to you. So you already have a sense of how things must be the case. What is universal? Um, and so it's just obvious to you, such that you ignore it. Um, and in some way, they're the base and the ignoring are you almost can't have one without the other. Um, it's not as if the base can generate itself uh, in a vacuum. It, it, I mean, it obviously relies on all the other elements, but you kind of get my idea that it, like for example, extrovert intuition being about possibilities and potential. Potentials only occur within, um, what do you want to say? Some type of bookend of definite time. There is no potential in non-existence, right? Nothing can. There's that's literally that's literally that's literally the eliminator for potential. If there is nothing, there can be no potential out of nothing, right? Unless obviously you have something outside of that, but whatever. Um, but even if you think potential within yourself, um, it's presupposing in a sense that it passes from potential to actual. And the moment it becomes actual, the moment it's actually existing within a period of time. Um, like potential presupposes already um, application within time. That's basically all I'm saying. Um, now you could have people that say you've wasted potential, right? Um, which still is assuming that the potential had the potential to be actual. Um, yeah, I'm just rambling at this point. Got one person watching. What's going on? Who are you? What are you up to? I'm just literally rambling right now. This book is really interesting though. So they dropped off. Cool. All right.